For historical context and more information, see the description below.
In that 18th chapter of 2 Samuel is the story of the death of Absalom and the grief of his father David. I'm sure you remember most of the details. Absalom had risen up against his father, forcing the latter to defend himself. The young man's mount had run under a great oak, and apparently his head became wedged in the fork of that yoke. I remember when I was in Sunday school, it was the story that his hair had caught in the tree, but that doesn't seem like a practical answer for a man who would have a sword. He could easily have cut himself down. It's much more likely that his head was caught in the fork of the oak, and his enemies came upon him and they killed him in spite of the fact that David had given word that no harm should be done to him. Two runners made their way to David and they broke the news. And David uttered some of the most sorrowful words of the entire Bible. My son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. Now this chapter is literally filled with sermons. Many have been preached upon it, but I'm thinking especially of the part of the 24th verse, and David sat between the two gates. What an ordeal that must have been. Just sitting between the two gates and waiting for word about a son who was in danger. He had wanted to go out and take part in the battle. He had probably thought if he had gone out looking for his son, he could have guaranteed more fully that the son would not be injured. But all of his people had said, no, he must not do it, that David himself was worth 10,000 of any of them. And so he had consented to stay at home. And he took his place between the two gates, and he stayed there, we know not how long. It's hard work. And it takes up a pretty big chunk of our living. In some instances, it's waiting as David waited for word about the safety of a son or some person that is very close to us who is ill. Sometimes it's a matter of just waiting for a bus or waiting for an elevator or for a traffic jam to open up. But a lot of life is spent just waiting, just sitting between the gates. And we're living in a period when people keep champing at the bit at the frustration of it all. And we're having a terrible time recognizing how deeply vital is this business of cultivating patience. But we would better come to the place, regardless of our age, we would better come to the place where we recognize that there are some things in this world that will not be hurried. As in the case of David, there are some happenings that are beyond our control. Certainly there were other things that he might have done, other things that people have done through all the centuries, He might have gone into a temper tantrum. He might have paced back and forward, cursing a God who would put a father into a world where he would become so at odds with his son that there was a danger that that son might be killed. He might have cursed God for what was happening. He might have stormed about and just scolded every person who came within reach of his tongue. But David didn't do these things. Evidently, he knew that such behavior would do no good. The city wall was several feet thick, with one gate on one side and one gate on the other. And the picture we get is of a man coming up in years, sitting between those two gates and refusing to panic in the face of anxiety. He was a man who had learned that sometimes we must let events run their course. And with all the patience he could muster, he sat quietly between the gates until such time as he could with profit do otherwise. And so he starts us off this morning with some thoughts on the need for cultivating this quality of spirit. We're not saying for one moment that we're not in need of impatience, in spite of the fact that Bacon said, whoever is out of patience is out of possession of his soul. John Calvin bemoaned the fact that he had never been able to conquer this ferocious beast that was within himself. He called it a wild animal. Jesus was impatient. His attitude towards sin, his denunciation of the Pharisees, his groaning beside the grave of Lazarus, his conduct toward the disciples in the garden, they're all a part of the picture. Dr. Luckock used to tell of a minister who on Mother's Day not only thanked God for the patience of mothers, but he thanked God for the impatience of mothers. Those who are impatient with laziness and with deceit and with selfishness and with whining and the other blemishes. Wasn't he right? Do not many people today have to give thanks for the impatience of friends and of parents? And aren't many of the areas where we think we've made progress due to the fact that there were some people who were impatient with things as they were? Surely this is one of the times that seems to cry out for this kind of impatient thinking. There's so much today that's wrong. And it needs not only to be corrected today, but it ought to have been corrected yesterday. We'd like to have this race problem settled today and forever. And it should have been corrected yesterday. We would like to have our differences with communism resolved. We'd like it to have been done yesterday. There's so many areas that seem to be putting pressure upon us to do things with dispatch. We're going to talk about that in another sermon or another sermon or another sermon. But there are also areas in this world where we need to have patience. History says that the great issues of life are never resolved quickly. Areas where if we lose patience, we can create more problems than we're solving. The black man's situation is serious. Before God, we must be at work on it while it's still day. But impatience can lead us to make moves that in the long run will do more harm to the black man than good. It's not enough to say that we should have done these things long ago. The fact is we didn't do them long ago. And we're still left with the big job, and we're still left with the long day. Before an effective job can be done, there must be some patient and some prayerful planning. There must be some sitting between the gates, and good will come from it if we don't go to sleep in the chair. Hard it is to take. There are these areas where we must make haste slowly. The Saturday Review had an article some time ago that was written by Raymond Irving. He pointed out that physical power is something that can be discovered in laboratories by comparatively few workers in a short period of time. Individual skill can turn that power into weapons in a short period of time. But he went on to say the political institutions to deal with such power cannot be detected in laboratories or forged in industrial plants. They have to grow out of experience. They have to grow out of social struggle. They have to come from inspired leadership. The fact is that real wisdom in anything isn't something that can be gained quickly. But let us not think that because we cannot take the long, swift strides that it's not worthwhile to take the short, slow. Great oaks do from little acorns grow. And great forests will come from them if we have enough acorns and if we have enough patience. Harriet Beecher Stowe had 6 children. With 6 children, I wouldn't imagine that a woman have a very much time in which to write a book. But she did. Patiently. Finding an hour here, finding an hour there. Patiently, piece by piece, she put together Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it shook the nation. Over in England, there was a session that became very impatient with its minister. And they accused the minister of the fact that he was not converting very many souls. And the minister had to confess that so far as he knew, there was only one small boy that he had ever converted in that congregation. But that small boy grew up to be the man that David Livingstone followed in Africa. Let's not despair of the small things that can be done. Slowly. The kingdom will come. Let's not be overcritical of our work. The slow pace at which it seems to be moved. There are millions of good people in this world. And those millions of good people want a better work. And they want it just as soon as it can be brought in. And it will come, provided we continue to labor, provided we don't grow weary, provided that we recognize that it's worthwhile taking these short, slow steps when the fast long ones are denied. And in the light of the foregoing, I think in this day and generation we have to ask our young people to be patient with the older ones within the limits of good sense. A goodly number of them are nettled by their parents, by their grandparents, and honestly, they've pretty good reason for being so. There are many things that we have done wrong, many things that we have left undone that we ought to have done. But the new generation is going to discover, as it comes upward in the ranks, that it's impossible for any generation to live without making mistakes. And it's impossible for any generation to live without leaving a good many things undone. And if they are honest with us and will take a real good look at the people that have been produced in the first half of this century, they'll have to confess that there are some pretty good folk among them. And if they will listen, those good folk have got some rather important advice to give to them. And patient young people won't see them, nor hear them, nor read them, and that will be the tragedy. Socrates once said that he who takes only a few things into account finds it easy to pronounce judgment. The tragedy is that youth may judge his elders without taking enough things into account. He's only going to take into account the things that he sees that we've done wrong. And he's not going to see the positive side of that picture. I would also like to ask this present generation to be a bit impatient with the members, patient with the members of their own generation that aren't quite as radical as they are. That they would listen to some of these young people that they have come to look upon as square. Don't dismiss lightly, we would say to them, some of the examples that these less radical ones, that these squares are still suggesting to them. In the area, for instance, of relations between the sexes, for instance. Multitudes of young men and young women still believe that the body is sacred and that there are some of the deeper manifestations of affection that should be kept for marriage. I would say to those who don't agree in that younger group, don't be too hasty about branding them as being old-fashioned. For there are many who will testify that those who have waited have been able to put their feet on a firm rock of happiness that the other group is never going to know until they change their way. There are certain behaviors in our relationships that are never out of date. They're written deep into the moral fiber of our being. And the most priceless treasures of human life belong to yesterday, and they belong to today, and they belong to forever. And you can't date true romance, nor loyalty, nor honor, nor devotion. They belong to always. In vain we call old notions fudge and bend our conscience to our dealing. The 10 Commandments will not budge, and still continue. Stealing will be stealing. Now, for those of us who are older, the admonition is in order to be patient with the young as they attempt to work out their destiny. If they could only start in their experience where we are. But life's not like that. They've got to stumble their way through. They have to jumble their way through. They have to make their mistakes just the same as you and I did. And we must allow them to do it. We can counsel them. We can talk to them about morals and such matters. We can talk to them about how important it is that they choose the right friends. We may warn them about the pitfalls. We may try to impress upon them the significance of the long look. But there comes the time where you and I, with David, have to sit down between the two gates and wait to see what's going to happen to Absalom. And there's nothing we can do beyond a certain point. But wait. It's tough work, tough business. Illustrated in the story of the prodigal son. While he was spending himself in riotous living, there was so little that the father could do about it but wait and pray. I believe in this generation. I believe that they have their scatterbrains, but so do we. I believe that they have their extremists, but so do we. And I believe that some good, solid accomplishments are going to come from that good, solid core that's at the center of the sons and the daughters of this day. I know in our impatience we're likely to call them rebels and a lot of other things. We'd like to change their garb, and we'd like to do something about the hair on their faces. As Dr. Bosley points out, in colonial days there were many young radicals who clustered around the campus of William and Mary College in Williamsburg. Several of those radicals became the founding fathers of the Declaration of Independence, and they formed the key ideas of the Constitution of these United States. They were the grand architects of many of our basic institutions, and I'm told that even some of them wore beards. Let us not lose our patience with God. So often we'd like to hurry him. We're troubled. We see evil in the world. We wonder why in the world he ever allows it to go on. Probably the parable of the tares gives us some indication of why. You recall the servant was most indignant when he saw them growing up with the wheat, but he was told that he must wait. Let the tares grow, and then the whole thing will be cut out together. It just may be that evil has to develop to a certain point before it can be destroyed conclusively. When the fullness of time was come, said Paul, God sent his Son. God has a time for things. And his purposes are worked out in his time. And Jesus always trusted that God was right. Do you hear that? Jesus always trusted that God was right. They tried to get him to break down. They told him to float down from the pinnacle of the temple, that God would keep him from falling, but he knew magic was not the answer. The answer, he was sure, was in God's slower, more patient way. It was in this that the psalmist found his faith. My soul, wait thou only upon God, or Isaiah said, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. You recall the two elderly people, a man and his wife, who went to visit a great cathedral? And as they examined it, the old lady said to her husband, I think they've chosen the wrong kind of stone. It's pretty, but it's too soft. And her husband said, my dear, it's always wise to say my dear when one's contradicting his wife. He said, my dear, don't you think the architect thought of that? Jesus believed in the plans of the architect. So he held on, he waited. When one friend denied and another betrayed, and when the remainder deserted him, he held on, believing that the divine architect had thought of that and had prepared him for it. He believed that with the help of God, things would work out. Think on that, will you? Next time you find yourselves sitting between the gates, just waiting. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We have presented a recording of this morning's worship service from the Shadyside Presbyterian Church, Amberson Avenue and Westminster Place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ministers of the church are the Reverend Dr. Howard C. Scharfe, the Reverend Dr. James R. Spear, and the Reverend J. Wayne Henretti. Organist and choir director was Russell G. Wickman, and today's sermon by Dr. Scharfe was titled, Sitting Between the Gates. Your comments on these services are invited. Addressed to Shadyside Presbyterian Church. Again, next Sunday night at 11:06, be listening for another rebroadcast of the regular worship service from the Shadyside Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.